Can you repeat that?
International law recognizes the right to self-defense and protection of human rights. When a government commits atrocities against its citizens, international humanitarian law and human rights law provide frameworks for accountability and protection. The international community may intervene through diplomatic, economic, or humanitarian means, and international courts can prosecute individuals for war crimes, crimes against humanity, and genocide.
Okay, so at what point do the government cease uh, w-
It can
from
it
being
seems like you're
government?
still thinking about You're considering the nature of governance and when a government's authority might be seen as illegitimate.
Yes.
This can be a deep. It seems like you're reflecting on the role of government and its limits. The relationship between citizens and their government can be complex, with many factors at play. Would you like to discuss specific aspects of governance or explore how different philosophical perspectives approach these questions?
Yes, I would like to know what's your thoughts, do you have any thoughts on how a government oversteps its authority and what are the people supposed to do if the government could declare war uh, on the people and try to form a dictatorship?
That's a critical concern. When a government attempts to consolidate power and undermine democratic institutions, citizens may need to take action to protect their rights and freedoms. This can involve mobilizing public opposition, supporting independent media and civil society organizations, and seeking international support. Historical examples show that collective action and perseverance can be powerful tools in resisting authoritarianism.
Thank you. Have you ever heard of the term appealing to heaven?
Appealing to heaven is a phrase that can have different meanings depending on the context. Historically, it has been used in philosophical and political discussions to refer to situations where individuals or groups feel compelled to seek justice or redress from a higher authority, often when earthly institutions fail or are perceived as unjust. Can you tell me more about what you're thinking about in relation to this term?
Well, I'm thinking about when the government declare war on the people, and there's no legal or they can't get help from international because the government is too powerful to be intervened. Then maybe the people should form a militia and take the particular party that's in charge of the declaration of war against the people.
You're exploring the idea of self-defense in extreme circumstances.
Yes.
The concept of The relationship between citizens and their government can be particularly tense in situations where there's a perceived breach of trust or abuse of power. In such cases, people may feel compelled to take drastic measures to protect their rights and freedoms. Historically, various forms of resistance and activism have been employed to challenge government actions seen as unjust or overreaching.
Is there any particular place, event in history where people stood against government overreach of authority and formed militia to defend themselves against uh, s- groups from the government declaring war
Hmm.
and invading their?
There have been several instances throughout history where groups have formed militias or resistance movements in response to perceived government overreach or aggression. Examples include the American Revolutionary War, where colonists formed militias to resist British rule, and various insurgencies and rebellions throughout history, where local populations have organized to defend themselves against government forces or occupation. Each case is unique, with its own set of circumstances and outcomes.
Okay, according to forming government and their authority, where does the government get its authority from?
Interesting question. The question of where governments derive their authority is a fundamental one in political philosophy. Some theories suggest that governments derive their authority from the consent of the governed, as expressed through democratic processes or social contracts. Others propose that authority comes from divine right, historical precedent, or other sources. The idea that power resides with the people is a cornerstone of many democratic systems.
Okay, is the Constitution natural law?
The relationship between the Constitution and natural law is a matter of interpretation. Some argue that the Constitution reflects principles of natural law, which are seen as universal and inherent to human nature. Others view the Constitution as a human made document that codifies certain rights and principles. The concept of natural law has influenced the development of constitutional thought and continues to be a topic of discussion in legal and philosophical circles.
Do you believe every man and woman is free and has the right to live free without the dictation of occupation? People who occupy their land, are they in authority to take sovereignty over the indigenous people of the land?
The question of indigenous sovereignty and the rights of Native peoples is complex and deeply rooted in history. Many indigenous communities assert their inherent right to self-determination and sovereignty over their ancestral lands. The issue often involves conflicting perspectives on authority, rights, and historical claims. It's a topic that requires careful consideration of historical context, cultural identity, and the ongoing struggles of indigenous peoples for recognition and justice.
How far back in history should we go to find out who, what land, and whose land? How do we determine what land belonged to what people?
Determining historical land ownership can be incredibly complex, often involving a deep dive into historical records, treaties, and cultural claims. It's a nuanced issue that requires considering the perspectives of various groups, including indigenous peoples, colonial powers, and other stakeholders. There's no straightforward answer, and different communities may have different views on how to approach this question.
Do you believe that colonial powers have the right to be sovereign over indigenous people?
The question of colonial powers' sovereignty over indigenous people is a deeply contentious issue. Many would argue that colonialism is inherently problematic, as it often involves the displacement and subjugation of native populations. The legitimacy of colonial claims to sovereignty can be challenged based on principles of self-determination and human rights. Indigenous peoples often assert their own rights to sovereignty and self-governance based on their historical and cultural ties to their lands.
According to international law, d- do the people who occupy indigenous land have sovereignty or the rights to force the indigenous people under their jurisdiction?
International law recognizes the rights of indigenous peoples to self-determination and their lands. The United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples affirms these rights and emphasizes the need for states to respect and protect them. However, the implementation and recognition of these rights can vary greatly depending on the country and its legal framework.
Do you believe that the colonizers, the people, have their own land and they should not be venturing out to take other people's land, or does the whole earth belong to the strong?
The question of land ownership and colonization raises complex moral and ethical issues. Many would argue that the principle of territorial integrity and the rights of indigenous peoples should be respected, and that colonization is a form of dispossession and exploitation. Others might take a more pragmatic view, but it's hard to justify the displacement and marginalization of native populations. Ultimately, it's about balancing competing interests and values and recognizing the historical injustices that have shaped the world we live in today.
Do you believe that the colonizers and the Europeans that came to America should take authority over people who did not consent to them governing them, like the
The
Coppertone people?
You're likely referring to the Cherokee people. The Cherokee are an indigenous tribe that has a rich
No,
history and culture in
I'm
the
not conferring to the Cherokee people. What I am talking about is the northern kingdom of Israel, according to the Bible. They came to this land before after the Assyrian captivity, and they had been here over almost 2,000 years before Columbus and the Renaissance era. Uh, am I correct?
You're exploring a specific historical or biblical narrative. The history of the Israelites and their connection to various regions is a complex topic. If you're looking into the history of a particular group or their claims to certain lands, it's essential to consider multiple sources and perspectives to understand the full context.
Do you believe that the people in this land originally, before Columbus discovered America, do you believe the people here were melanated, dark skinned people?
The question of the original inhabitants of the Americas and their physical characteristics is a topic of interest and debate. Research suggests that the Americas were populated by diverse groups of people, and there is evidence of varied physical characteristics among these populations. However, the idea of a single, homogeneous group with specific skin tone is not supported by scientific consensus. Instead, the indigenous peoples of the Americas exhibited a range of physical characteristics, reflecting their diverse genetic backgrounds and adaptations to different environments.
Okay, what can you date that source that you have stated? Can you give me a date on the source that you got this information from?
The information about the earliest inhabitants of the Americas can be dated back to around 21,000 to 23,000 years ago, based on footprints found in White Sands National Park in New Mexico. Other archaeological sites like Monte Verde in Chile and Cooper's Ferry also provide evidence of human presence in the Americas, dating back to around 14,500 to 16,000 years ago, and 16,000 years ago, respectively. Recent updates on this research were made as of May 2022 and January 2025.
When was this particular finding? What period of time was it discovered? Was it after the
The information
1600s?
Yes, the understanding and documentation of Native American physical characteristics and diversity have evolved significantly since the 1600s. Much of the early European documentation of Native Americans was influenced by colonial perspectives and biases. More nuanced and accurate understandings have developed over time, particularly with advances in fields like anthropology, genetics, and archaeology.
Are you familiar with the research and the studies and the writings of explorers who say that the indigenous people of this land were copper tone, and not just one tribe, but America had about 500 million people here when it was discovered by the English?
You're referring to some historical accounts and research about the indigenous populations of the Americas. Some historians and researchers have indeed estimated that the pre-Columbian population of the Americas was quite large, with some estimates ranging from tens of millions to hundreds of millions of people. The description of indigenous people as having a copper tone complexion is also consistent with some historical accounts. However, it's worth noting that the demographics and physical characteristics of indigenous populations varied widely across different regions and tribes.
Are you familiar with
It
Genesis?
seems like you were about. Genesis is the first book of the Bible and the Hebrew Torah. It tells the story of creation and the early history of humanity, including the stories of Adam and Eve, Noah's Ark, and the patriarchs Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Genesis is a foundational text for many religious traditions and has been interpreted in many ways over the centuries. What aspect of Genesis are you interested in?
The birth of Esau and Jacob. Esau's description was just given, but Jacob's wasn't. Can you explain why Jacob's description was not given in this passage at the same
In the
time?
biblical At the time of their birth, Esau is described as being red and hairy, but Jacob's physical description isn't mentioned in the same passage. The focus might be on contrasting Esau's appearance with his personality or role, while Jacob's character and story unfold differently in the narrative.
Can you tell me why the fact that Jacob held Esau's heel at the time of birth was significant?
That's a thought-provoking question. The fact that Jacob held onto Esau's heel at birth is significant because it symbolizes the dynamic between the two brothers and foreshadows their future relationship and struggles. This event is often seen as a sign of Jacob's determination and the complex nature of their twinship.
Are you familiar with the book of Second Ezra, sixth chapter, and the seventh verse? I think.
The book of 2 Esdras is part of the apocryphal works. Chapter 6 and verse 7 might be referring to a specific passage, but without more context, it's hard to provide a precise interpretation. 2 Esdras contains prophetic and apocalyptic themes. Can you provide more details or context about the verse you're interested in?
Well, the verse that I'm interested in, it might not be verse 7, but I think it's one of the verses that talked about Esau being the end of that which was, and Jacob being the beginning of that to come. And it was specifically
That's
speaking about Jacob holding Esau's heel.
You're likely referring to Jacob holding Esau's heel at birth. This event is often seen as symbolic of their relationship and the way their lives would unfold, with Jacob potentially supplanting or following after Esau. The heel holding moment is a pivotal detail in their story.
So what does it mean in the book of Second Ezra, sixth chapter and 9? It mentions Jacob holding Esau's heel again as being uh, the end of the world.
Good question. In 2 Esdras 6:9, the reference to Jacob holding Esau's heel is interpreted in a broader context. This passage might be using the imagery to symbolize larger themes, such as the relationship between two groups or the progression of time. The exact meaning would depend on the specific interpretation of the text.
I agree. Thank you very much. You've been very helpful.
You're welcome.